not going to have any hissing at all with that filter, eh?
Let's hope that pop doesn't do anything, right?
It's key. I'm kind of fucking around with this mic still. I'm just pretty terrible with technology, so I try to get like pretty good gear, and it's okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I'm at.
Nice.
Yeah, we're doing all right. Dude, this is going to be super cool. I'm excited for this. You are the kind of person that I have not had on my podcast, and
as you can imagine, I get that a lot.
yeah,
what I do is so weird.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I have,
So
I
I
have
get it.
close friends that are like super into the fashion style realm in their life. And as soon as I thought to reach out to, I'm like, these friends of mine need to listen to this.
Cool.
They're probably going to be like, fuck, finally, Josh, you're like, finally you're listening to something. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I'm excited to do this with you.
Cool, man. Yeah. Actually, my marketer, the guy I work with for marketing from the same area, he said, you can check out this Tanner Guzy guy. So that's just the power of social media. You can just easily follow people, and
it's pretty sweet.
It's cool, man.
Pretty sweet.
So here's the first question I got to open up with, and just this is probably going to help us some background as to what you do. But why don't men dress well?
Man, that's such a good question, especially because there's a difference between not dressing well and not dressing with some effort or some intentionality, or like trying to curate a look, right? And so what I would say is that most men have accepted the idea, at least most men in kind of like the United States have accepted the idea that the only appropriately masculine way to care about how you dress is to look like you don't dress well. It's this kind of like affected, I have to look like I don't care, otherwise people will align me with somebody that is something that I'm not. So it's a very intentional aesthetic, and it's one that they've almost been kind of forced into embracing, and then now just kind of like reiterate in their heads that that's the only one that's appropriate for them.
Right. And I can see the pitfalls of that. Like, that's a pretty narrow circuitry, right?
Yeah.
Is that how a lot of folks that hire you, a lot of men hire you? Is that kind of where they're starting from?
Yeah. A lot of them come from there, where they've started to pick up on a lot of other things that they really have found improve their lives. It may be that, hey, I've finally started making a bunch of money, and I realize how good my life is with that. Or I've got my fitness dialed, and I realize how much better I feel about myself because I take care of my diet and my workout routine, or any number of things. And then they kind of start to almost collect excellence, where it's like, I'm really good here. I'm really good here. I'm really good here. Holy crap, my clothes really suck compared to everything else that I'm really good at. And it becomes this glaringly obvious deficit, and they want it to be brought up to the same tier as everything else that they've worked to improve on. And they're hoping that they will see the same kind of like synergistic benefits of, hey, I get my fitness dialed in, and all of a sudden work is going better, and my relationships are going better, or I get better with my relationships, and then it's easier for me to make time to go work out. And so everything kind of bleeds into everything else. And they recognize that doing that with their clothing can have a similar effect as well.
So do you find the bulk of men that come to you, are they at that realization already, or do you help them say, your clothes suck, I'm here to help?
Yeah. When it comes to my social media presence, most of them have to spend some time kind of getting warmed up to me. And that's a lot of what my quote unquote marketing is giving these guys permission, or even, the paradigm shift of, it is in no way threatening to your masculinity. In fact, it's a very good enhancement to your masculinity to put some effort into this and to care more than just the default. But the majority of guys who end up coming on and working with me as clients, they've already made that transition. And so they're looking for just help on how to execute on it well, minimize the risks and the mistakes, and kind of speed up the process for them.
And when you say default, is that sort of what you're talking about initially? Like I got to make it look like I don't care in order for that to be okay?
Yeah, because for most guys, I mean, if you truly didn't care how you looked, then you would just wear whatever your wife has in her closet, or you would wear garbage sacks, or like, the big snuggy things, because those are super comfortable, right? And so guys care, but they just care enough to be neutral. They know that I don't want to dress in a way that looks bad. I don't want to embarrass myself, so I'm going to avoid any of the negative. And they go into this kind of neutral, and they don't realize that there's power in dressing in the positive, that I want to dress in a way that actually looks like I can communicate who I am, that it makes me feel congruent with who I am on the inside and who I am on the outside. And so this default is just don't look like an idiot. And they start to break out of that as opposed to, oh no, it's not just avoiding the bad, it's embracing the good.
Yeah. And what's coming up for me is it's almost like, playing it safe, right?
Yeah.
Like just don't notice me.
Yeah. Yeah. It's this, don't pay attention to me. Don't have any expectations of me. I just want to blend in. I just want to be comfortable that way. For a lot of guys, that's what it is they talk about being comfortable from a physical perspective is what they tell themselves. It's like, oh, I just want my clothes to be comfortable. But honestly, when your stuff is made well and it fits well, you can be comfortable in a tuxedo. You can be comfortable in in boxing gloves. You can be comfortable in anything. But what they're really saying to themselves is, I want the comfort of low expectations. I don't want people to make any judgments about me that may not be correct. I don't want people to have any expectations of me that I may not be able to live up to. I just want to kind of fade into the background and not have anybody see me, judge me, pay attention to me, or anything to that effect.
Right. And I could see why that sort of zooms out into, you talked about like the synergistic effect of dressing really well or exercising well. And I feel like, I'm curious to hear your opinion, but I feel like if you're hiding under the radar, that could also have leaky energy into my fitness routine not being, very good, or not reaching, or not setting potential goals or anything like that, and playing it safe across the board. Have you noticed
Totally.
that happening? Yeah.
Totally. Because you see yourself in the mirror every day. You see yourself on Zoom calls every day. You see yourself, if you post on social media, you see that all the time. And whether you like it or not, what you wear will subconsciously reinforce your self-perception and these narratives that you have in your head. And so if what you see, if the version of yourself that you see every day is somebody who just wants to fly under the radar, that's the identity you start to adopt. Whereas if you embrace the identity of somebody who's, and I think a lot of guys make the mistake of thinking that there's this kind of binary of either I can fly under the radar or I have to be some fashionista guy that's like desperate for attention, that I have to dress in a way where it's like, you have to notice me and you have to tell me my style is awesome and you have to tell me that I'm totally on trend. And there's a whole world of difference in between those two. And really where most guys benefit is this idea, this kind of middle ground of, I'm not desperate for your attention, but I'm also not uncomfortable with the fact that I would stand out, or that you would pay attention to me, or that you would expect a little bit more of me, because I expect a little bit more of myself. And I am comfortable having people pay attention to me. I am comfortable having to shoulder the load of expectations. And that's kind of where most guys should be.
Yeah. So I'm coming from a fitness background, trainer of a long time, worked with a whole, spectrum of clients. And what's really interesting about this is, I sort of clung on to the idea that I finally found a job I can wear track pants at, right? And it's socially acceptable. And as you're saying that, it's like, yeah, but it's like,
isn't that crazy? That like that's this programming in your head that whether it's like your identity or something else, there's something that is so rooted in being able to wear track pants and have it be socially acceptable that you will change your career and like build a business in order to facilitate the ability to just wear track pants. What is that? Why is that so important to you? Why is that self-perception so massive that you're going to put in all this work and all this effort to be able to get away with doing it? It's insane that we do that, but we all do.
Yeah, and it is insane, but I'd be curious to see, this is going to turn into a therapy session on track pants, but I'm game to do it. What's funny about this is, man, as a kid, you couldn't catch me in anything other than track pants up till like grade 5.
Okay.
Not sure why. And then a switch went off, and then I was only wearing jeans, and that was common, right? We all wore jeans as a kid, whatever. And then I flipped back to track pants, man. And I'm 32. Like I'm not a kid, right?
Right.
And not exclusive track pant, but it had that flip flop.
Yeah.
And I think it's to your point. It was sort of the assuming I need to prioritize the comfort, and I can't prioritize looking good or feeling, my best or optimal if I'm prioritizing comfort.
Right. That those are somehow mutually exclusive.
Yeah. That's a shitty narrative.
It is. And imagine if we did that with our fitness or with our relationships or with our finances, where it's just like, no, I just want to be comfortable.
Yeah.
And it's so weird that we don't do it in those arenas, that we understand the power of it there, but we still do it when it comes to our clothing.
Yeah, I agree. And I can totally name like fitness. I'm like, if someone said, I'm kind of good where I'm at, I'm like, well, I don't really want to work with you anymore then.
Totally.
right?
Yeah.
So I can totally get where this comes in for you. So the one of the questions I had was, how do you working with clients or whatever, how do you sort of amalgamate financial investment with self-respect when it comes to clothing and style?
Ooh, I don't think I've ever been asked that before. That's a good question. Um, this falls into one of the last things that we hit on, and it's this whole idea of effort and how much effort you want to put into it, because obviously the financial aspect of it is a component of this effort. And the reality is with any of these other things that we put in from an effort perspective, there's not a right or a wrong answer. For some guys, they really resent the idea of having to spend a lot of money on their clothes because there's a narrative that that's vain, or, you know, they're going to get shamed by friends or family or something else. And so they're happy to spend tons of time going thrift store shopping. And like every Wednesday, I know that there's going to be this new dump of stuff that they load in, and I'm going to go spend an hour every Wednesday and I'm going to go try and find good clothes. Or I'm just going to go shop at TJ Maxx or at Marshall's or wherever else. And but I know I'm going to have to replace my clothes every 3 months because what I'm buying is garbage. And there's not a right or a wrong answer to how much money you should be investing into this. The only right answer is, how much do you put in so that it feels like it's an energy boost to keep doing it, as opposed to it being an energy drain. And some of my clients will pay more to work with me than they ever pay in their closet themselves, as far as like the actual clothing that they buy. And I've got other clients that, you know, they're 40, 50K into their wardrobe, and they really love, like, they're invigorated by this idea of having a bunch of quality clothing and then everything in between. And so it really just depends on what's going to enhance your relationship with your aesthetic as opposed to diminish it.
Yeah. And of course there's a spectrum, based on what you feel comfortable financially and all that.
Mm-hmm.
Now, how does it work so can you kind of give me a scratch notes on, okay, so if someone's interested in hiring you, what are some of the kind of assessments or questionnaires, or what's some of that look like?
Yeah. So I'll give you kind of like the three, like 50,000 foot view, the three key pillars that we look at as we go through the program, for sure. Okay. The first thing that we'll look at is aesthetically what we can do for you, because there are rules to aesthetics, just like there is if you go to art school or you go to film school or you go to anything that's kind of a visual medium. You learn about timing and color grading and pattern and proportion and all these other variables. And there's stuff with this as it relates to your clothes. And for most guys, you get them to wear simple neutral colors and stuff that fits, and it immediately changes how they present themselves to the world and to themselves. And they already feel a massive boost on that. So we start with the aesthetics component. From there, we move on to communication. And this is where clothing really is its own version of communication, just like you're writing something down or like you're speaking, because you take something like a suit and a tie, and 100 years ago, that was the uniform of professionals. Today, that's kind of like a stuffy, almost like 20th century throwback. 2000 years ago, and a 20th century suit would have looked like this goofy costume, right? And so everything is very contextual when it comes to clothing, and that context is always changing based on time, based on where you live, based on what industry you're in, based on if you're a man or a woman, based on your status within the group of people that you interact with. There's all these little variables that come into it. And it's the same thing again with language, where you can talk about a PR in fitness, and if somebody doesn't know what that jargon is, or, well, what's a PR? Explain that to me. Whereas, you know, you speak that language and it makes perfect sense. The same thing happens with clothes. And so what I do with my clients is we figure out what the slang is, what the jargon is, what the expectations are, so that they can express themselves to the people in their lives that matter the way that they want to. So you've got aesthetics, then communication, and then the third aspect of it is self-perception. Because a lot of times people feel like the most important aspect of your clothing is how you present to other people. It's getting them to judge you the right way. It's facilitating relationships, and that's certainly powerful. But where the real power of it comes in is how you change your own self-perception and your own identity. And I mean, kids get this. When you dress up as Spider-Man or as a Ninja Turtle when you're 5 years old, you're not doing it to like impress your parents. You're not doing it because it's going to do anything with your relationships with other people. You do it because you start to believe more that I'm this superhero. And so it's this kind of embodied idea of, now I can fly, or now I can use my swords or my nunchucks and I can fight this way. And as adults, yeah, we don't take it to these cartoonish superhero levels, but when you dress in a way that when you see yourself on social media or you see your reflection in the mirror, you see yourself on a Zoom call, and you look like the best version of yourself, as opposed to just this average guy that's trying to disappear, that's the story that you start to reinforce in your own head. And so that's the identity about yourself that you start to embrace. And so the real power is changing your own self-perception, just like I'm sure that you've experienced, that your clients have experienced. When you put on 20 pounds of muscle or you drop 30 pounds of fat, you cannot see yourself the same way anymore. Like your whole identity changes because of the difference that you see in the mirror. Same thing happens with your clothes. And so what I do is I teach my guys to be able to factor in all three of those, so that they get a really good, unique, very personalized sense of style by the time we come out on the back end. And then they have the skill set to be able to change that as their circumstances in life change too.
Right. And is this, I noticed you offer group coaching as well.
Mm-hmm.
So is this how you would generally sort of facilitate group?
Totally.
Yeah, same
totally.
idea.
Yeah. The only difference with the group versus the one-on-one is how much I'm there to kind of hold your hand on it, but it's the exact same curriculum and the same material and everything for the group guys as it is for the one-on-one guys. Yeah.
Yeah, this is great. I like the self-perception. That makes a lot of sense. So you're talking about embody, sort of like what I'm picking up on is you sort of want to dress like you want to be perceived by yourself. It's kind of the same way I would do goal setting. It's like, okay, you got to be able to self-identify with these things that are sort of in the future. And you're saying dressing is another way to do that.
Totally. It is. It's a way for you to be able to kind of immerse yourself in whatever that future reality is, so that that starts to feel like a more tangible reality for you.
So how do you, what are your opinions on this? Because now, especially lately, there's that hiss, I wish I had that filter. How does this work now, or how does this sort of shift happen now that so many people are working from home? Like, are guys just not wearing pants anymore on Zoom calls? They're just wearing sick dress shirts,
right? Isn't it crazy? Well, and I think this ties into one of kind of the misconceptions that a lot of us have, is that the best version of myself is always the most formal version of myself. And so in order to be able to see a better version, I have to dress up more. So if I'm in like jeans and a t-shirt, that means I have to do khakis and a button down. Or if I'm in khakis and a button down, that means I have to go into a full suit. And that's not the case at all. You can do a pair of sweatpants and a t-shirt, and you can execute on them in a way that's really poor and it looks complete garbage, and then you feel like a bum when you're wearing it. Yeah. Or you can execute on it in a way that it's like, yeah, this is super simple and super casual, but it looks deliberate. It fits well. The colors make it so that I'm the thing that people see or that I see, as opposed to that it looks like I'm trying to blend in or disappear, or that I'm just a mannequin for these like wild and crazy clothes. And so COVID and remote work and everything, I think a lot of people expected it to change things, but all it really did was kind of highlight the limitations for most men as far as what they think dressing like the best version of them looks like.
You say highlight the limitations. How does that fit in then?
Well, because again, if they think that the best version of me has to be more formal,
right,
and that's what most of us thought, is I would like get dressed up to go to work, and the real me, or the me at home, is this casual version. And again, formality really doesn't have anything to do with it. Really good style can be on the very bottom tier level of formality, where it's, this is what I wear on a Sunday when I'm sleeping in, or this is what I wear when I mow the lawn. And it can go all the way up to the most formal, this is what I wear at my own wedding, or I wear to my parents' funeral, and then everything in between. And so this tool of like upping the formality is a very limited perspective. And there's so many other variables to be able to tweak with, so that regardless of whether you're working remotely or something else, you can still come in and be able to change your style so that it benefits you.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense then. So yeah, you're saying the formality piece is just limited on its own. It sort of has to be a lot more broad than that.
Right. Right. I mean, even take like what you've got on. It's a simple black t-shirt, where imagine if it had like, you know, for me as a dad, like what if it had a poop stain from when my daughter had a blowout on me? Or what if it were all like ripped in the armpits? Or what if it had this like bacon collar, we're all stretched because it's the same t-shirt that I've worn for 40 years? Or it had some dumb logo from like, you know, a golf tournament that my dad participated in 10 years ago. And that was what I reinforced in my head every time I saw it. That's very different than just a well-fitting, simple black t-shirt that looks like you've got some dignity. It looks like you've got some self-respect. It looks like you still care enough about your appearance to present that to yourself and project that to yourself. Totally different, even though the formality between the two hasn't changed at all.
Well, and I can give you an example. Like what I was wearing first thing this morning was a shittier shirt and worse fitting track pants. And
there you go.
part of it was like, oh yeah, I have this podcast, probably, subconsciously I'm like, I'm working with a guy that's going to be, he's into style. So, but I'm also like, I feel better in this fucking t-shirt. It fits me better. So yeah, that twofold approach, man, I get that for sure.
And the goal is to get yourself to the point where you don't have anything that doesn't feel like you could be seen in public in it. Because I feel that way. I mean, there are plenty of days where I have to run to the grocery store to go get something, and I'm in sweatpants and a pair of slip-on Vans and a t-shirt. Like, it is not formal. But I also know that if I were to bump into any one of my clients there, they'd be like, oh my gosh, this guy even pays attention to how he dresses when he's dressing down. And that's what you want. Like, I don't have any bad options anymore. And that doesn't mean that I'm always dressed up or that it's always a super complicated outfit. It's really easy to totally purge all the bad stuff and still be just as effortless in your appearance, but have it be so much better.
Yeah, that's a good point. Almost just getting rid of the shit that sucks. Really. Getting rid of the shit that sucks. There was a video you posted. So I feel like we have a lot of similarities in our training. You did a cold plunge video, like, right? There's some buzzwords, cold work, breath work, blah, blah, blah. One thing I really liked, and I want to phrase this as a question. You talked about doing hard stuff is important around your kids, essentially. Doing stuff that sucks or makes you suffer, blah, blah, blah. I'm in the same boat, but I want to know why you think that's important. And then I'd like to know, what are some other examples other than, the cold plunge?
Cool. There is no excellence found in perpetually seeking comfort. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be comfortable as long as it's not where you live. Comfort should be a place that you visit. But there's no excellence, there's no attainment when your highest priority is what's going to make me the most comfortable. That's true when it comes to our finances. That's true when it's come to our morals. And it's also true when it comes to our clothes. And I think, sadly, the narrative that a lot of men have embraced is they try to like get all the hard things in life out of the way early on, where it's, I go to school and then I get a good job and then I get married and then I have a family, I get the mortgage, and then now I've done all the work and I just get to kind of like coast out for the rest of my life. And it's a terrible example to set for your kids, because what they should see their parents doing, and certainly see their dads doing, is setting the example of striving to become more. Because I mean, dude, I'm 37, I'm not old. And if this is my peak, I totally not only failed myself, but I failed my kids by setting the example that you peak when you're in your mid 30s. Yeah. And so I feel I have a moral obligation to set an example for my children that excellence is found in doing hard things and continuing to push yourself and continuing to find hard things that you can do to make yourself better. Does that answer that first one for you?
Yeah. And I fucking love the answer. I could get you to repeat that for an hour and a half and I'd be pumped. Like, I love this stuff.
Right. This is what I love too. And this is where I mean, honestly, that matters to me so much more than clothing. That pursuit of excellence, and especially how that relates to fatherhood. And clothing is a really good way to do that, where your kids see, man, my dad really like pays attention and he dresses well and he dresses better than most of the other guys in the neighborhood and all of that. Your wife sees that, you see that about yourself. Like, dressing well is one of those quote unquote hard things. It's actually really easy, but there's some discipline that's involved in it, and it's good reinforcement for that. So yeah, I mean, that's part of the way to answer your second question. But I remember even just this week. So I've got a home gym, and most of the time I've got 4 or 5 other guys in the neighborhood that come over and lift with me. And it was like New Year's Eve or New Year's Day, I don't remember. And I'm in there by myself, and my 9-year-old daughter opens the garage door and she just kind of says, "Oh, Dad, you're working out by yourself. Where are all your friends?" And I said, "Well, it's cold out. It's like 20 degrees and we're in the garage, and it's the holiday. And so I'm sure that they're just kind of enjoying getting to sleep in and be with their family." And she's like, "Well, why aren't you doing that?" So, well, because this matters to me, and because I need the discipline to keep doing this. And I know that if I give myself permission to do this on these days, then it's more likely that I will give myself the permission to get lazy on other days. And it was really cute, where she just kind of gave me a hug. And then I heard her talk to her brother, my son, right before she was closing the door. And she's like, "Man, our dad is so cool. I'm so glad he does stuff like that." Right? Isn't that so fun? Like, oh, it just hits, like I'm tearing up thinking about it. But
yeah.
And so it's all of those things. Like, I try and find so many ways. Like, our neighbors built a half pipe. I hate skateboarding. I grew up on a BMX bike, and like people that can skate, it's a whole different level of balance, and you guys are awesome.
Man, it
But
is.
I can't tell my son that he should learn how to skate and like, let's learn how to ride the half pipe if I'm not willing to do it too. So I learned how to skate the half pipe this year so that I could ask my son to do it, or just like whatever little I mean, I've got this cello behind me because how can I ask my kids or tell my kids that we expect them to learn how to play an instrument and to go to piano lessons every week and to practice every day if I'm not willing to do that kind of hard thing myself and set that discipline for myself? And so I'm constantly trying to find ways that I can live an example of doing hard things for my kids, as opposed to just, well, you got to do it, and then when you get to be my age, then you could just let your foot off the gas and take it really easy. So I'm always trying to find new ways that I can lead out on that for them.
Man, I'm so happy to hear that. And we're just meeting for the first time, but that's fucking awesome. And
Thank you.
I have one son. You have what, 4 kids?
5. Yeah, 4
5?
girls and a boy. Yeah, which is another hard thing.
That's a lot, man. That's a lot. And having the 4 girls, so that's oh man, that's a real powerful story. And I can just imagine my own son. He's only 2. He's just about 2, so he's
Cool.
not quite at that age, but he's certainly storing this memory of like,
Totally.
he sees his dad like doing fuck all, complaining about life. It's like my dad was a real like wuss, and he didn't try.
Right. And then that's what manhood is to him. And so
Yeah.
why would he want to become a man? Why would that be something that he wants to embody if you don't make it aspirational for him?
Yeah, 100%. I think that's really important. And I, like I said, we both love this stuff. So the music is cool. I play drums.
Awesome.
I saw the cello right away. Why'd you choose cello?
Man, that's a good question. I think the real reason, it's funny that it's just timing. I mean, part of it is that it's a beautiful instrument. There's a masculine aspect of it, and that it's the one that sounds closest to the human voice. And there's that kind of depth. And I've fallen in love with it even more because when you're playing on those lower notes, you can like feel it vibrate in your chest. But I think a big part of it was, do you remember that this is an old movie? I think it was like 2003. Did you ever see the movie Master and Commander?
Yeah, wasn't that with
What is it? Russell Crowe? Is that his name? Gladiator and all of that.
Yeah.
He's in it. And gosh, those guys were like the coolest example of Renaissance men, where they're out on the ship and they're going and exploring and they're learning and they're doing war. But you've got the doctor who's also a scientist, and then they one of them plays the cello. I think it's the doctor that plays the cello, and Crow, the captain, plays like the fiddle, the violin, whatever it is. And I think part of it for me was seeing that, or seeing other kind of like Renaissance men, that there's something different about that than there is to playing the guitar, which I have a guitar. I learned how to play a few notes on the guitar. My dad's a fantastic guitar player, but the cello just felt like it hit a little bit more. It resonated a little bit differently.
And it's a lot less common, at least for the people I know.
Yeah. And it's fun because then I get to play, I learned how to play a Christmas hymn this year, and that was kind of one of my goals with it. And then the next year is to be able to play a different hymn with my wife and play it at one of our church services. And it hits a little bit differently than singing and playing the guitar around the campfire in the backyard, which I still love to do. But yeah, cello feels a little bit more robust and a little bit more unique that way.
Yeah, I could totally sense that. And especially feeling the vibration, like that's, a lot of people feel that about drumming and
Totally.
bass. And I think in a lot of that's also a percussive instrument technically, right? I believe, or
no, string
instrument, I guess. Yeah. Piano's percussive, right? So this is interesting. So why didn't you go with something like drums? I know like that story resonated, but in terms of like masculinity, I think whether it's indigenous cultures or, I mean, you've done a lot of research anthropologically on even dressing.
Right.
Where does drumming come into this? Does it come in anywhere?
I love this. I've never even thought about this, because you're right. Drumming is one of those things that like the really nerdy version of me sometimes wishes that we had a bunch of animal skin drums in the garage, so that when one of us is trying to hit a PR, we're all like drumming and tapping into that war chant energy that way. And there's something very powerful there's a very powerful relationship between masculinity and music, and also participatory music, that you're right, at its most basic version is drums, because drums are what they play when troops are going into war. Drums are what they play when you're trying to get everybody on rhythm, when you're rowing the ship and you're about to go discover a new land. Like there's something that's very powerful to that. Maybe I should learn the drums. I'm having like this epiphany right now, but there is a depth to that that's really, really cool. And I wish that that was something that I had more experience with. I wish that I could be involved in things that were a little bit more ritualized, or that you participated in when it came to drums, as opposed, I mean, sadly, most of us, when it comes to anything related to music now, we just consume it. We don't sing, we don't write music, we don't really even, you don't go to concerts as much as you used to. Like, you just consume whatever Spotify can spit out into your earphones, and it's a totally different relationship with it than what the vast majority of human civilization has had when it comes to masculinity in music, or even just music in general.
Yeah, totally.
Man, what a fun tangent.
Yeah, but great, right? So this is the reason I got into drums. I got into drums when I was like 12, and we liked music. I have an older brother. We shared a room. I got a lot of great influence from him because he was my cool older brother, and I wanted to do what he wanted to do, right? Do you have siblings, by the way?
Yeah, I'm the oldest of 5. So 3 little brothers and a younger sister. Yeah.
So you're the older brother, right?
Yeah.
So we had a family friend that was good at every instrument. We used to go watch him at bars, and, well, maybe not bars, but anyway.
Yeah. Restaurants.
Restaurants, sure. Yeah. And literally one day he just brought a drum kit over and gave it to us. It was like the best thing ever. We didn't ask.
He was like pissed at your parents or something, wasn't he?
Something like that. Yeah. You're going to love him now. And like, we started playing because it was just in our room. We shared a big room. And I remember the first drum beat I ever played on a drum kit. And that was when I was 12. It's 20 years, or no, that was when I was like 11.
Yeah.
And there's something about any instrument, and I think this kind of zooms out a little bit more into just music in general, but there's something about music that's clearly deeply embedded in us, because for me to think that you could be playing for 5 seconds on an instrument or 40 years and you can still get a level of excitement out of hearing it and moving and expressing in a way that I don't know that you can experience that in quite other fields or things as much.
That's a fantastic point. And you think about these guys that have been touring in bands for like 4 decades, and you kind of project your own monotony with your own job. And it's like, well, I don't want to be doing that for the next 4 years. I can't imagine playing the same set, pretending that I'm excited to be in this city every single night. But those guys, they could retire. They could have retired 20 years ago if they wanted to, because if you're still playing for 40 years, it's because you've made enough money and you still keep doing it. And, that's how I feel about my job now. Is it's not tedious. It's not monotonous. I still get excited with new clients for new breakdowns or something else. And I think you're totally right that there's something about music that, whether it's the first time you like hit a note right, or you get a drum beat right, or you've been doing it for decades, it still elicits an emotional response and an excitement to it that a lot of other things don't do.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's part of the reason I was so excited when I saw you playing the cello.
Yeah.
Because it was just, I saw someone and an instrument. That's it. And I saw joy, right? That's all.
That's it.
Those 3 things. And it fucking didn't matter if you had a piccolo and you're unbelievable or first time. Yeah.
Doesn't matter.
Funds, doesn't matter.
Yeah.
How does music come into, okay, so that's kind of the self-reflection piece, but what about your own music listening? So I've been looking at all your videos, and I'm a music buff. I've been interested in music a long time, and I know I'm a big Brand New fan. I saw that.
Nice. Yes.
Some of your videos. And so definitely pretty nostalgic. What kind of music do you like to listen to when you're training?
So I'm still constantly trying to figure this out. It feels like it very much varies depending on the day, where it's pretty easy, especially if I'm running versus lifting. It's pretty easy to go back to like late 90s, early 2000s, pop punk, emo, third wave ska, which is very much what I was like. That's what high school and early college years and all that were for me. The only song that I ever learned to play on the drums was it's a Less Than Jake song. I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but like, an old third wave ska band. Okay. So that's there. My wife is really, really into more kind of like folk stuff, which I'm starting to enjoy more and more. Dark country is a genre I've been getting into lately, but we've got like Flashback Friday, where every Friday in the gym, we just play like old new wave, almost like Patrick Bateman playlist stuff of like 80s new wave stuff. And that's really fun. And so I wouldn't say that I have a really diverse taste, but at the same time, it's, I'll explore with Viking war chants on a PR day or something. I'm open to trying to expand my musical palette is probably the best way to describe what my relationship with music is right now.
Have you ever listened to classical while you're lifting?
I have, and it didn't hit me the same way. I know one of my good buddies, Jack Donovan, he listens to like Hans Zimmer soundtracks. Like that's what he loves to lift to. And I've tried that, or I've tried classical, and it distracts me instead of helps me get into the zone on it.
Yeah, that's fair. And music's so interesting in that way. I remember this was actually pretty effective now that I think about this. But when I was in like grade 10, we weren't allowed to listen to music like on headphones.
Okay.
But I was so disruptive that the teacher let me. I would be listening to like I've been into metal for a long time, so I would just be into metal, but I wouldn't be doing the work at all.
Right.
So music became this like I can't listen to it at that point. It's like I can't listen to it and not be paying total attention to it. And in a lot of ways, metal as a genre has been something that I can't really listen to and expect me to do something else.
Huh. And it still pulls you in that way.
Yeah. But what's interesting is when I sort of peak strength and all that, there was certain, pump up songs and parts of song, like you're standing there with your phone and you're like, okay, I got 10 seconds before the chorus, I'm grabbing the bar, right?
Yes. You time it that perfectly where it's like, it's going to drop. And that's when I pull. Yep.
Yeah. So that feeling, that's pretty common with lifting, but what also is really cool. So getting into, this is kind of where it leading back into like do hard shit around your kids so that they can see it. It's lifting without music. It's doing the really hard shit without music, right?
Yep.
You've experimented with that a bit?
I've experimented with that, and there are definitely days where I like to do that or drive without listening to music. I think the hardest thing for me, 2 years ago, I trained to do a half Ironman, and when you're doing triathlons, unlike other distance races like a marathon or a half marathon, there are no headphones allowed on the course. And so you have to be able to do it. And I remember doing my long runs, doing, 2-3 hours out on the road, and learning to do that without music was really, really difficult. And it's so good for you when you learn how to do it too. And so there's still plenty of times where I will deliberately say, I'm not putting anything on. I'm just going to be in my own head for this drive or that run or that lifting session for sure.
That's great. I think that's really important. I didn't actually know that they had that as a rule for Ironmans, half Ironmans. But I do know a friend that's going to be listening to this. His name's John Whitsing. Him and I started training together. We don't currently train together. We live different provinces. He came from this really intense Ironman background.
Cool.
And when I met him, I was just finishing up my amateur strongman comp. So very different training, right? But both components of endurance and mental toughness and that. And he developed this thing called the concrete wall principle. And we sort of alluded to it. And it's while he was training for the bikes, he had his bike in his garage, no music, no one there. And he would just stare at the wall.
Holy cow. Man, good for him. That's intense.
It's really intense. And but it's not far off of what you're doing with the runs. It's just like being able, it's like almost getting, I've experimented with it in a lot of different ways too. It's like almost getting excited to see what the inner dialogue is going to be. Because I don't know, you don't really know. And eventually it sort of might change a little bit or grow or something.
Right.
I don't know. It's fucked up. It's weird.
Have you ever heard of or read the book Unbroken, or they made a movie out of it a few years ago too? Do you know anything about it? Do you have that up there?
Yeah, it's on the book and the movie are Unbroken.
Right. Okay. So do you remember when they're lost at sea for however many, it was like 45 days or 50 days? You remember how he's talking about eventually your brain just gets to the point where it starts locking into the most minute details of these ancient memories because it's done everything it can do without having all of these other distractions. It's just ocean day after day after day. And so I wonder how much of that we deprive ourselves of because we're constantly like, I'm always on Instagram or on Twitter scrolling, or it's always I'm always putting something into my brain. And how much do I miss out on? How much internalization, how many like good insights could I connect the dots on? I'm going to have to try that concrete wall principle, man. You're a dick for that one, but that's a really good principle.
Well, I'm just like the pass along dick. He's a real dick. Yeah.
Tell him I hate him and I appreciate him.
Tell him I hate him and I can't wait to meet him.
Exactly.
There's you did happen to choose some of like the most intense training though, right? With half Ironmans. I've never done a half Ironman, but I've been in the endurance sport community for, I don't know, a bit of time. What is your opinion on some of the more difficult types of training? So I've seen you do powerlifting. Congrats on the 440 PR.
Thanks.
By the way. What else have you done? You've done clearly running, biking, swimming.
Yep. I did a Spartan race, a Spartan Beast last year. I did a boxing bout back in 2018. I did a few years of boxing and played with that. I think for me, I like the idea of experimenting and exploring with other things. Triathlon, I fell in love with that enough that I'm excited to do some sprints and some Olympic distances this year, but the rigorous training to get to the point where you could do a half or a full Ironman was a little bit too much for me. So I think I'd have to have like some friends or my brothers or my dad, like, this is what we're focusing on this year to do that. But I just love, and especially guys that, it sounds like what you are, the other guys like Nick Bear or Hunter McIntyre, or some of these other guys that are kind of like the hybrid athletes.
Right.
There's something so cool about not getting one dimensional, where it's like, well, yeah, you're incredibly strong, but you can't walk up a set of stairs without dying, or you're super fast, but you couldn't deadlift your own body weight. I like the idea of being more robust and well-rounded. And so I've set a goal every year. And the goal this year is I'm going to do a 400-pound deadlift and then run a sub-4 marathon in the same day. We're going to do that in October.
That's a cool goal.
It'll be fun.
So 400-pound dead. So that's sub max for you, but who knows? Like, depending.
Who knows where I'll be with all that conditioning, especially because we're doing the Beast again this year. We're doing another Spartan race in July, and then it'll be switching over to mostly marathon training between July and October. And so, yeah, we'll see where strength gains are with that and how well I can maintain it.
And then a sub 4 hour marathon, you said?
Yep.
Is that a good time for you, or like where?
Yeah, I mean, if I were to be able to do my half marathon pace, I think my PR for a half is like 143, 144. And so I would be able, I mean, but it's doubling the distance. And so it's certainly going to require some work and some conditioning for me to be able to get there. I would love to be able to, set a goal of like 4 plates and sub 3 or something, but it's just, that's the training, the time and the training and everything with running a business, having a big family and all that. I don't think that's in the cards for me yet. So, yeah.
That is pretty challenging. What are your thoughts on CrossFit?
I've experimented with it a little bit just because my boxing gym was like half MMA gym and half CrossFit. I don't know if it's a culture thing or if it's just that I haven't had the right people, but the probably like 6 or 7 times that I've done it, I enjoyed it, but it never really pulled me in. It never sucked me in. I'm certainly not antagonistic to it like a lot of people are. Yeah. Some of the stuff those guys can do is incredible and it's super admirable, but no, I've never quite had that bug bite me.
So this is kind of what I thought of. This is an idea you kind of pulled out of me, is you talked about the Renaissance man. And I've tried to identify that before. And that's part of the reason, Ty Lopez, have you ever followed him?
Yep.
Right.
Knowledge. Yeah.
No, right. He Six Pack Mind. He pulled me into that idea of like, you can really be bettering yourself in all these ways. Like you're your own limit is what I took from it.
Totally.
And I feel like I've never heard this or really thought this, but I feel like maybe a reason CrossFit is so appealing is because you're sort of representing the closest sport version of what it would be to be a Renaissance person.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, because you're well-rounded. And I mean, that's what's so cool about, you look at the CrossFit Games and this like crazy mixture of sports that they throw into it. Yeah. And it's totally different. Did you watch the Spartan Games last year? Do you know anything about that?
No, I haven't watched any of the Spartan Games. I'm familiar with it, but go for it.
Go watch it on YouTube. It's really cool because they took, I don't remember what it was. It was like 12 and 12 or 10 and 10, but like groups of men and women. And they did this like 3-day intense thing at Joe DeSena's place in Vermont, where they would do like the first day was a 5K Spartan race, and then they had to do a 45-minute swim for distance, and then they would do like a strongman thing. Oh yeah, it was like Highland Games where they did Atlas stones and some of this other stuff. And then the next day they did like a 6-hour mountain bike ride followed by wrestling. And so they just take this like hodgepodge component of all these events and then tier them out. And I've never had the idea of a sport really hit me as hard as that does, where it's like, let's not get super specialized. Let's just see who's the best overall and do it with a mixture of strength training or endurance or agility. And I know that CrossFit hits that, but these guys did it in even a kind of different way that there's something super appealing about that.
Yeah, I think I could totally see why you're saying that. And what's interesting too is, I've from what you're saying, you're boxing, you're running, you're swimming, you're biking, you're deadlifting, they're all solo endeavors. And there's a lot of controlled variables with that. And what's interesting is like, you watch The Last Dance or you watch any of these fucking unbelievable documentaries on team sports, and you're like, so this is my thought now. I'm like, really, to excel in a team sport with so many uncontrollable variables, I feel like that requires a lot more athleticism.
That, and also a lot more humility. I quit playing team sports when I was maybe 13 years old, 14 years old, because I got really into BMX bikes and snowboards. And when you're that young, you can't do both. You have to like pick. I'm not going to be one of those dumb jocks. I'm going to be one of these guys instead. Yeah. And just recently, within the last like 4 or 5 months, my wife grew up playing soccer. She played for her high school soccer team, and she's been playing soccer most of our married life, indoor leagues, kind of like rec stuff. And then within the last few months, we have quite a few couples in our neighborhood that we all play on a team together. And they kind of like twisted my arm into coming and playing. And I forgot how difficult it is to perform under pressure when you're not the only one who is dependent on the outcome of your performance. Like how much harder it is to not choke when, if you miss that shot or if you make a bad pass, you're letting your whole team down instead. And so I'm definitely embracing more of this team dynamic because of that, because it's shined a light on a weakness of mine, which is this very like individualistic. I like to be the only one who suffers when I fail, and team sports, they beat that out of you really quickly. So yeah, I definitely need to be doing more team sports. And you're right that it requires more athleticism. It just requires more of you in a lot of ways than an individual sport does.
Yeah, that's a good point. Again, I could just keep asking you questions. You said you kind of like to be the only one that suffers. What does that mean to you?
I think it's an abdication of responsibility, which sucks, but it really is like, I don't like the pressure of, and I remember feeling this way when I was on, a baseball, you're like your regular gym baseball team, because that's what you're focusing on in gym class your sophomore year, or playing soccer at 14 years old. And I hated missing a goal or missing a shot in basketball or something else, and knowing that I let my team down. And so what sucks is I ran away from it. I just focused on individual sports instead, and not even consciously realizing that that was what I was doing. But now that I've gone back into those team sports, I've realized that. And then you start to go, okay, well, how else have I bled into that? Is that one of the reasons I'm an entrepreneur? Is because then I'm, other than me and my family, nobody else really lives or dies by what I do. And is that a strength or is that a weakness? Is that why I'm nervous about growing my business to the point where I'm going to hire employees because I don't want to be responsible for that? Like it just, it uncovers so much more about yourself if you're willing to be self-aware and not kind of shy away from recognizing those things about who you are.
Right. Yeah. I could see what you're saying. And that is kind of a tough part about fucking life too, is wanting to be, individualistic in certain ways, but then also clearly, needing and wanting community. Like you have a tribe, man, you have 5 kids, right? And
right.
So clearly, and you mentioned church and lifting with the 5 guys in the garage. That's all, well, what I would say is community oriented.
Totally.
So do you feel like there has to be an element of community to all things in life?
Totally. Yeah. Otherwise you're a sociopath. Right. I mean, yeah, you can be individualistic about some things as far as, this is the sport that I'm doing, or this is the way that I'm training, but to be so isolated from people that you want less community as opposed to more, I mean, sociopath is a little bit strong, but it just depends on how far down that road you want to go. But I think for most of us, the idea of being involved in something, being part of a tribe, and both the expectations, but also the blessings that come from that, I think most of us are wired to want that for sure.
So what comes to mind if someone asked you to think about working for someone else right now? What does that feel like for you?
It's terrifying because I would give up my autonomy, and I don't ever want to give up my autonomy again. I loved the company, the last company that I worked for. I still partner with them a lot. I loved the two guys that I worked for. But if I had to go back to being their employee and not having the autonomy that I do, no way. No way. You could pay me 5 times what I make now. But if it meant that I had to give up that autonomy to not only control my schedule or where I am, but also say, I want to try this, or I want to explore with that, couldn't do it. I value that way too much. And so, yeah, going back to working for somebody else is I don't like that idea.
Yeah, that's fair. I've kind of went back and forth. So I just moved to Victoria from Ontario.
Okay.
Right. So I've stayed in Canada in terms of where I've been living. And
where in Ontario were you?
Peterborough.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I lived in Toronto. I spent some time in like Mississauga and Oakville and all of that for a little while. Yeah.
Oh, you did? When was that?
That was 2003 to 2005.
Is that like so that would have been college then?
Yeah. So I was a missionary for my church out there. You ever seen the guys with like the white ties or the white shirts and the ties and the black name tags that are going out talking about their church?
I think so.
Probably. Yeah. That's what I did for 2 years. And I got sent out to Toronto. And so I got to spend a lot of time like in Toronto proper and then kind of out in the suburbs and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Toronto's pretty cool, man. It is. It's a different city.
Crazy city. I would imagine Victoria is very different compared to anything that you experience, even just anywhere in Ontario. Cause I've got one client who's in like Northern Ontario. And we constantly talk about how it's a whole different world, even just depending on where you are in the province. Like Toronto's a different beast.
Where are they at? Northern Ontario? Like Timmins?
I don't remember. It's a small town, like a small rural town. But
the Hamlet, right? It's a post office. Yeah.
Probably. Yeah. Sorry, I sidetracked you. Anyway, you moved out to Victoria. Good. Yeah.
It's all good. I moved to Victoria. So I was co-owning a gym. So I've been in the gym game for a while. Worked for other people, worked for like big companies. That's how I started. Then bought in with a friend of mine, and then just circumstances led me to sell that and move out here. And to your kind of point, I had an experience where I felt kind of comfortable because of a whole bunch of shit. I was sort of like foot was off the pedal. I was sort of experiencing some burnout. So I was I felt some relief. I drove across Canada and had this week of reflection.
Okay.
And the reflection wasn't long-term reflection. It was, I think I should probably get, a 9-to-5 job, something that won't consume me after hours, essentially.
Right. Yeah. That you can clock out of.
Yeah. Something you can check out of, clock out of. And I thought, I'm going to work with my hands. I'm going to do some shit that requires some heavy lifting, some grunt labor, because that's what I would do in a gym anyway. Right.
Right.
And it took about a month of me thinking about that, not working, just like living off some of the passive income from houses, to be like, man, I am not living my purpose right now.
Yeah.
And I don't want to work for anyone else. I need to have room, and I can't have a leash on me.
Right.
And that autonomy came up, and it presented itself in lots of ways. And I wrote about it in this ebook I created of like, I think the chapter is like, I forget actually what I even called it, but it was like, how do you know if you're someone that is going to be really driven for goals? And that was sort of my outline. It was like, this was my anecdotal experience, was like, try it the other way.
Yeah. Well, and to bring that full circle, I almost wonder if that's why the track pants thing was so important to you. It's not necessarily the comfort of the pants, but it's those in your head were a symbol of autonomy. And so you wanted to be able to work in something that this feels like this is the capstone. Like, this is how I know that I've got that full autonomy, is I could still wear track pants when I go to work every day.
Dude, that could totally be it. Actually, I never thought about that, but that's the power of conversation.
Yeah.
Could be the track pants. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of guys, I mean, you get a lot of like the super rich, especially now, and they love to dress in a way that is totally dressed down and totally almost like bum casual. And it's like, no, the guys that wear suits, they're the ones who work for me. And so it is the goal to get to the point where you're so successful financially or from a status or a recognition perspective that you can dress however you want. I think that very much has become, man, I'm going to have to do a post on this. I think that has very much become a symbol of autonomy, is being able to dress like you don't care.
Cool.
Yeah.
So you're
yeah,
talking,
I think that makes sense.
So you're saying be well enough off that you can still look good, but you don't look like you're in power, essentially. Is that
right? Well, and a lot of them don't even want to look good. They just want to look like they don't care. They just want to look like, yeah, I don't have to care. That is for lesser people that have accomplished less than I have. They're super conscientious about these things. And I've done enough in my life that I don't have to care. I can just focus on what feels comfortable. But it's this subconscious idea of that is the new symbol that they create for themselves. And if they don't dress that way, then it's constantly buzzing in the back of their heads that I haven't done enough yet. I'm not autonomous enough yet. I'm still being beholden to something that I don't want to be beholden to, because they've externalized dressing well, that it's something that is imposed on them by somebody else. It's a threat to their autonomy, as opposed to internalizing it and having it be an expression of that autonomy. Right? I'm just thinking that, yeah, I'm going to have to do something on this. I think that makes a lot of sense.
It's a cool thought, man. And the more as I'm listening, I'm like, man, what you do is so little about actually dressing people, eh?
It really is. It has nothing to do with like, go buy this t-shirt. It's so much deeper than that. Yeah.
And that's what I'm getting drawn into, because we're not talking about dressing at all, really. No. We're talking about being autonomous and feeling in control. And
right.
Great.
And how clothing does bleed into all of that. And I think that's one of the things, is we treat it as its own very separate thing, but it's so crucial to our own identity and the way that we interact with other people that it bleeds into everything. And that's why you can look at it as, is this a symbol of autonomy or a symbol of conformity in it? Because whether we do it consciously or not, we do it. It's too integrated into who we are to not do it.
Yeah. It's going to be hard to pull off being a nudist and just fucking try to get the job you want.
Right. Or I'm going to wear a toga because I think that aesthetic is cool. Or, I just really love pink gorilla suits. And so that's what I'm going to embrace. Like, yeah, it's hard to do that and not have that affect you, your self-perception, or the way that other people see and treat you.
Right. So what comes to mind for me now is like, so you're working with guys that are wanting to embody how they want to feel. So when I'm thinking about this, there seems like definitely a bit of a gap, right? Like, I'm not quite there, but I want to dress so I can feel this way.
Mm-hmm.
So with that gap, or in that gap, it's like, is there, like, what is that? Is there a bit of like, just trust the process and you'll probably eventually fall into that embodiment? Or is it sometimes like guys will get there and then they're like, no, I actually don't think this is how I want to dress. Maybe I'm not connected with my true self enough.
Yeah.
What is that space?
So there's almost two different answers to that, because the first one kind of hinges on the idea of where I've arrived, or what I'm projecting is actually what I want. And there's a distance there between where I am and what I want to be. And the dissonance that you experience when you're in there, that kind of tension, that's one of the reasons why most guys don't really put in a lot of effort in addressing well, is because they're super uncomfortable with that tension. This is why we call guys posers or fakes or frauds or tryhards or any of that, is how dare somebody embrace that tension that I don't want to embrace myself. But the reality is that tension is a good thing. And you have to think about it. I actually compare this a lot to progressive overload from a fitness perspective, because, if my current 1 rep max on deadlift is 440, I'm an idiot if I just try and throw like 500 pounds in the garage and I'm going to go pull that tomorrow. It doesn't work, right? The disparity between what my capacity is and what my goals are is too much. And so I have to find something that pulls me a little bit out of my comfort zone. And then when I'm in that tension, I get to decide, am I going to embrace this tension, this dissonance, and I'm going to push so that I become the person that can pull 445, or I can become the person that dresses a little bit more intentionally, and that now internalizes, and that's what I embody? Or do I resent that tension and that dissonance? And instead I drop what my expectations are by, no, I'm only going to put 440 on the bar, or I'm only going to dress the way that I've always dressed. And I'm going to run away from that, as opposed to living up to what that tension is kind of forcing me into. And so you don't want to create too much, but you want to create enough of that tension that it forces you to either it's a fake it or make it thing. Like you either say, I'm going to do it and I'm going to rise to what this is that I'm projecting, or I'm going to run away from it. That's assuming that what you're doing gets you there, you know. And I love that your second question of, hey, what if I dress in this way and I start to identify this way and I start to create myself this way, I start to present myself this way, and it's actually not what I like. What's cool about it is that it is putting in enough reps that you can then say, okay, well, no, that doesn't quite work, but I can now identify why it doesn't work. It doesn't work because it sends the wrong signals, or because the fit is physically uncomfortable, or because it's too garish in its color or its pattern. And so it's not a complete abandonment, but it's a fine tune of things. And so you know, maybe a good comparison of this is like thinking about tweaking your form with something like a deadlift, where maybe you've got what is the, and again, I'm just making this up as we go, so this metaphor may not hold up, but maybe you've got the like aesthetic and identity equivalent of having really long femurs like I do. And so trying to pull a perfectly conventional deadlift doesn't work. That's why I have to do this weird, like super narrow feet, like ballerina plie style stance, is because that's what gets my hips enough that I can keep the bar close to them. So it's a little bit of a variation on that, but you don't know that until you pull conventional enough and you work with somebody who's a master enough that they can say, actually, let's try this tweak a little bit more. Maybe you do sumo or something else. And so you kind of make those mistakes, or you recognize those things as you go with your style, but then you have enough tools to be able to say, well, yeah, this isn't not working because my back's not right, or because I'm embracing too much texture in my style. It's because, you know, my femurs are too long, or because I'm relying too much on color, or whatever else it is. And so it gives you the tools and the perspective to be able to alter where you should be, so that you do end up getting the desired results instead. I think that metaphor holds up. I'll stick by that.
It's pretty decent. It's not terrible. It works for me. And no, I think it does hold up. I'm going to go with it. And man, is this not interesting that, like, again, it's another thing for me, new to, like, you know, personifying how you want to look and feel in clothing, but it's another application where failure is likely part of it. And
Totally.
that means you're learning and you're pushing. Like, I never would have thought of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that's hard is that when you fail with your clothing, you fail publicly, and you fail in a way that nobody's ever going to correct you, because nobody's going to be like, hey, Josh, that shirt sucks. Sorry, dude. You know, but they're going to treat you a little bit differently, or you're going to feel self-conscious about it. Whereas when you fail, and it's also not as objective, like deadlift form is pretty objective. Like, you know, these things, like, you know, you don't bend it, you don't round your back, and you have to keep the bar close to your hips and all of that kind of stuff. And so it does make it harder, but that doesn't mean that there are not ways to learn how to fail well, and to fail in a way that you can learn from it. I mean, that's the same thing. I'm teaching my kids to ski, my youngest, or my third this year. And when I taught my two older ones last year, the very first thing you do on the first day is you push them over, and it's like, here's how you fall correctly, because skiing is infinitely less terrifying when you know how to fall in a way that you're in control of the fall. And it's the same thing with style. Is trying to get out of your comfort zone is infinitely less terrifying when you know how to fail in a way that isn't just completely humiliating, and you learn how to be able to experiment and embrace that failure is part of the process, just like failure is part of the process when you're learning how to ski, you're learning to start a business, you're learning to do anything else, is you have to embrace failure and its integral aspect, or its integral role in that eventual growth and success.
So I got to ask you a question then, because you and I both know that there's a fairly fundamental approach to deadlifting. There are some rules, right? You have
right.
The bar has to be here. You have to lift it up. It has to be executed this way. Your back can be this way. Your hands can be this way. There's some like variation, but with dressing, it sounds like you mentioned there's rules to aesthetics, but are different people playing with a different sort of rule book?
Yeah, maybe that's where that metaphor does start to fall apart a little bit. Well,
Sorry, man.
No, this is really good because it's helping me flesh these ideas out. I'm really excited to go back and listen to this podcast too, because then I'm going to see where the holes are. I think that with deadlift form or with strength training or something else, there's more of these kind of like objective rules.
Okay.
Whereas I think when it comes to style, the only real objective thing is that you have to have a good gauge on where you are subjectively. I just did an Instagram thing on this yesterday about the idea of the aesthetic Overton window. Okay. The Overton window is basically, it's a political term, but it's basically, these are the ideas of things that are acceptable to talk about within a political sphere. And so right now you talk about things like equal rights, or you talk about systems of oppression versus systems of colonization, or this. So like, these are the things that, whether you like them or not, whether you're cool with like transsexuals in sports, or like, it doesn't matter, because that's acceptable for us to be talking about. Things that are not acceptable for us to be talking about are like, how does America build its empire, and what are moral ways that we can conquer other nations and be able to subject them to our rule? Right. That was within the Overton window 300 years ago, 400 years ago, if you were part of the British Empire. And you have the same thing that happens when it comes to clothing, is you have kind of the aesthetic Overton window, where the way that I put this yesterday is like, right smack dab in the center of it is t-shirt and jeans. It doesn't matter if you're a billionaire. It doesn't matter if you are living in government housing. It doesn't matter if you're blue collar, white collar, if you're black or white. It doesn't matter if you're male or female. Like, it's not inappropriate for anybody to own a pair of jeans and a t-shirt. That's totally within the Overton window. You go back 500 years and it's a complete joke for somebody to show up in anything resembling a t-shirt and jeans. It doesn't matter what culture you're in. There's nothing that looks like a t-shirt and jeans. And so maybe the best way to think about it is that window is always changing, but the objective thing, like you have the objective form when it comes to strength training and deadlifting, is that you need to know where you fall subjectively within that Overton window and how it's moving, so that you're constantly, and maybe it is to your advantage to be on the fringes, to be on the outside of it, but maybe it's to your advantage to be right in the middle of it. That's where it's very personal. But you cannot dress well, you cannot have your style be a tool if you are ignorant to the idea of how it affects your self-perception, how it affects other people's perspectives of you, if you're ignorant to the idea of what the aesthetic Overton window is. So maybe that answers that.
Man, that's a cool thought. It's like really neat. Like, it's really reaching for like, other examples in life. Like, it's fairly relatable. I've never heard of that Overton window.
Yeah. And the political one is Joseph Overton is the guy who invented that. I don't remember when, but I'm the only guy I know of that's talking about it from an aesthetic component. Yeah,
it's neat, man. Like, that's what's interesting too, right? It's like, dressing well it's cool, but it's like, it's what's behind that. I think that's what I'm getting from it, right?
That's what makes it so fun, is that people, a lot of guys kind of resent the idea that I have to do this, or that this is really lame or anything. And it is. I mean, if you're just like copying what GQ tells you you're supposed to wear this year, it's really lame and it's stupid and it's boring and it's whatever. But when you get to think about it on this level, and it really becomes this like deep, or at least this reflection of a deep measure of self-development and self-perception and kind of identity creation and all of that, then it's actually really kind of fun to nerd out about it and embrace it.
Yeah. Yeah, man, it's really cool. This is opening my eyes a lot, actually, like, to your point. What I've been thinking about a lot is how self-confidence sort of fits into dressing, right? Like, clearly it's a component. You can't be like, no, dude, you look great, and that's it. Right. It's like, if you don't feel great, then that's kind of the way you go. How does self-confidence fit into this? So you have someone that doesn't feel very self-confident coming in. So men, you don't dress women, right? It's purely men.
It's all men. Yeah.
All men? Okay.
Yeah.
So maybe that'll change, maybe it won't, right?
Yeah, I'd love to figure out. I mean, I would make so much more money if I could figure out how to do this with women. They're so much more open to it, but system is totally different. Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay. So you have a man that's not very self-confident. So what are some of the other tools? We've certainly been touching on them. So I don't want to act like I haven't been listening to this conversation, but you're doing, so you talked about the aesthetics, right? The rules, the aesthetics, and then you talked about communication, and then self-perception.
Yeah. Awesome. Good memory. Yeah.
I seriously wrote it down, but I didn't write perception clearly. Where does self-confidence fit into this? So you have this explanation, and then what if they're still not buying into it? Like what happens, or buying into themselves?
So what I would say, and this is one of the things that I screen for when I'm on a call with guys to see if they're a good fit for the program or not. I made the mistake early on of working with guys who lacked in confidence and thought that dressing better would be the way to kind of like kickstart that and turn that on. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. You have to develop your confidence in things that matter more. You have to develop it in your relationships. You have to develop it in your physical presence. So like what you're doing from a fitness standpoint, you have to develop it with your finances and your ability to kind of like affect the world around you based on, you know, I can take these chances, or I can buy these things or not buy these things, where you're not just totally subjected to whatever somebody else decides for you. And so if you're totally lacking in self-confidence, style is not the right place to start. You have to get some other big wins under your belt. And then what style does is it shores that up and it helps reaffirm that and do it. And it doesn't mean you have to have all of it under your belt. A lot of my guys are guys that maybe they just went through a divorce, or they've got another 50 pounds that they're trying to lose or something else. And we use their clothing to help that. But you have to have some root of self-confidence that's already developed in at least one of those other arenas before your style can have any sort of impact, positive impact on it. Otherwise, you're just going to feel like a fraud in whatever it is that you are wearing. Yeah.
Do you feel like that's kind of where, or maybe one time where feeling like a poser really lives?
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I think it's the same thing with imposter syndrome that you get as an entrepreneur, doing somebody who's doing social media or something else, where it's like, you know, if I were to start a business, I don't know, teaching somebody how to do real estate, it's like, no, I'm a poser. I'm a complete fraud when it comes to that, because I don't know anything about it. And I can't talk about it. I mean, sure, I've worked with some guys that are in real estate. I've got friends that are in real estate. Like I can hold enough of a conversation and not be a complete idiot, but I can't teach that. I can't project any mastery in that arena because I'm not. And so there's definitely some reality in feeling like a poser when you dress like a poser. And if you don't have self-confidence that's rooted in real life accomplishments, then dressing like you do, you're going to feel even worse about yourself.
So do you feel like the term poser, because it sounds like, you know, it's a self-perception.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe this is just a fucking really, really stupid example. I don't know, but so you're like, in my experience, you're growing up, it's like teenage years, and you're looking at other people and calling them posers. So does that say a bit more about yourself, do you think, or about that person? Or do you just have a poser judging another poser?
Right? We're all just LARPing.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of it to that. I think the mature way to be able to look at that is somebody isn't a poser for trying something that's outside of their comfort zone. And I think most of us as teenagers, that's what we do, is we see somebody that they try something that we wish that we had the balls to try and we don't. And so we soothe our own lack of courage by saying, oh, that guy's a tryhard, or that guy's a poser. And I think we definitely fail if we treat it that way. But the reality of a poser is somebody who professes mastery in an arena in which they haven't actually earned that mastery. So for example, you know, I've played one season of indoor soccer in the last few months. If I show up with like a $500 pair of custom Nike cleats, and I've got, you know, my Real Salt Lake jersey, and I'm wearing everything that says that I'm like really into soccer and I'm really good at soccer, and this is my world and my skill level reflects that, that's me being a poser. There's nothing wrong with dressing like I'm into it, but I don't want to falsely project the idea that I've mastered something that I haven't mastered at all. And I think that's what really being a poser is.
Those are pretty good definitions, I think, and like differentiating definitions.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe it's semantics, but I feel like there's reality. There's a whole world of difference in between those two things. And so we shouldn't be afraid of teenagers calling us posers because they're just cowards. But we also shouldn't be so ambivalent to that we just actually do become posers.
Right. So yeah, sort of a shitty position to be in. You just got a bunch of posers that aren't self-aware.
Right. And I mean, that's what it is to be a teenager, right?
Yeah, truthfully, yeah.
And it's funny how many men in their 30s or 40s or even their 70s still hold on to that. Where it's like, no, I can't try that. My friends are going to make fun of me for being a poser. I'm sorry. I'm sorry that still matters to you.
Yeah. Your friends are dying, man. You're in your 70s.
Yeah.
What was I going to ask you? Oh, yeah. How did you get into this then?
I mean, I started a blog 10 years ago because I wanted to write. I wanted to do journalism or do talk radio and stuff. And I got sick of writing about politics because that topic sucks. And it's heavy to write about all the time. I knew that I wanted to write about masculinity content because it was something that was appealing to me and I was reading about it a bunch and I wanted to offer something that was different. And I've always been really sensitive to my style. And so it seemed like I was kind of already inadvertently connecting these dots between, the relationship between masculinity and appearance. There certainly wasn't anybody else that was writing about it. And so I started with just kind of an experiment of writing about it. And then not only did it resonate with people, but it became a really fun rabbit hole for my brain to go down. And like, as you've heard today in real time, I'm still connecting dots that I've never connected before. And I really love doing that. Like that never gets old. And so it's fun to continue to see how much I can flesh all of that out.
Yeah. So that's cool. So 10 years ago, you're doing a blog and similar style, but the politics, how was that your start? Was that something that you were interested in or something that you felt like was just popular to write about?
I was interested in it. My mom is very vocal politically and it was something that morals are something that very much matter and kind of the connection between morals and politics and all of that. It's kind of funny because I cringe now at I'm not a libertarian. I think there's a little bit of naivety to that. Not that I hate libertarians, but I'm not that way. But I wanted to be like the young libertarian version of like a Glenn Beck or a Rush Limbaugh, because that's who the guys were 10 years ago. And, really grateful that it didn't go that way. And I certainly don't shy away from talking about politics or morals or principles or things like that. But really glad that it didn't work out, because then it would have been the same thing. I would have just been working for a local radio station and I would have lacked all the autonomy that I have today. And now I get to talk about whatever I want. And I get to do it on my own schedule and build my own audience doing it.
And you get to do all that other stuff. A lot of writing, a lot of journalism, a lot of speaking.
Yep.
Your TED Talks are great, man.
Thanks. Yeah, that was a fun one to get to do this summer. And, getting to speak at 21 convention or Menfluential or do other things. Like I love the opportunity to get to talk on stage and present stuff like this.
Yeah. You can tell you're passionate about it. Like that's usually an easy thing to tell. Like, yeah, I didn't think you were a poser.
No.
Yeah. No, I thought that was really good. How do you think, I want to jump back to training.
Okay.
You've done lots of different types of training. Mm-hmm. So has your confidence or your style changed based on the type of training you have done?
Totally. Yeah. You go back and you look at photos of me when I first started 10 years ago, or even like 5 or 6 years ago, before I started to really see some progress in the gym. And I can't help but laugh and go, I can't believe this dude would talk about masculinity, because he's just so small and scrawny and his presence is totally, there's something to, I am not a killer. I've got the pleasure of knowing and having worked with guys that are Navy SEALs and Green Berets and these guys who are very dangerous men. And I'm not anywhere in that territory. I've done one boxing bout and I lost, and I lost handily. But there's something about spending time dealing with combat, even on like a combat sport level, just sparring, let alone actually getting in the ring for a real fight, that you start to realize you're not as fragile as you think you are, and your body language changes and you carry yourself differently. And there's all this that comes with it, or you put on 40 more pounds of muscle than what you started with, and your style changes and you start to embrace a more physical component to who you are. Or even little things like, I can't sing and hit the high notes that I used to anymore, which is weird that even in my 30s, like my voice has dropped and I don't have the same range that I used to, but all of those things change. And so if you're doing your style well, then you recognize those other changes in yourself, and then your clothing starts to reflect that too. And so I've definitely seen my style evolve in the last few years as I've gained more weight and put on more muscle and become more dangerous, even in, the smallest of ways, for sure.
Yeah, I actually didn't expect that answer. That's cool. I truly didn't think that would change.
Oh yeah, no, and it should change. That's one of the things that I love being able to teach my clients, is a level of self-sufficiency, because when you're 40, you better not be the same person you were when you were 30, and you shouldn't be dressing like you did when you were 30, both because styles changed, but because you should have changed and you should have grown. Sadly, I see a lot of guys that are like that. It's like, oh, I can tell that you hit your peak in 2002 when you were in college because you still wear a flex brim cap backwards and you wear the like Kohl's special of not relaxed or not baggy, but not skinny jeans. Like you can tell based on these guys kind of when they hit their peak because their style hasn't grown or evolved with them. And sadly, it's because for most of them, they haven't grown or evolved either. They're just the same person that they were back then too.
So clearly there's an issue with that.
Totally.
Now, what's interesting about music is, again, you're listening to brand new in some of your videos. With music, there's this whole nostalgia piece that's acceptable, right? Like,
yeah. But I wonder that too, because man, when I listen to the old emo stuff, I can't believe I would pump my brain with those garbage lyrics. It's no wonder I didn't have confidence as a kid in high school. Everything, and I've said this on other shows before, but everything that I listened to was music that was written by losers about being a loser for losers. How do you pump that into your brain 24/7 and not come away from it being a loser? You know,
that would be yeah, I think you're right. Like it's got to have an effect. Like it's media. So
yeah,
I mean, we're,
and so I'm very careful about how much of that I let myself listen to because I don't want to fall back into those mindsets again.
Okay. So you do think that's also important? Yeah,
I do. Yeah.
Man, you're a really intentional person, eh?
Thanks. Yeah. I try to be.
That's really interesting. I would love to have, if you find someone that studies music in this way, how different.
Oh, that's a cool idea.
How different genres affect confidence. That would be, I don't know how the fuck they would study that, but be really neat.
Man, I hope somebody ends up doing something like that. I would love to pay attention to somebody who's creating content like that, let alone doing like a full-on study on it. That would be awesome.
Yeah. I wonder that. I listened to a lot of the same stuff as you, I think, during those years, but I also listened to a lot of death metal.
Yeah.
So did you as well?
I didn't. No, metal, any of the hardcore stuff, none of that really clicked for me. Yeah.
So I can just, this is my initial thought. I'm like, the lyrics are about death, and like a lot of it's about killing, and not always negativity, but a lot of dark stuff, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes just emotion, but definitely dark. And I wonder how that would have affected, a teen.
Right. And how does it not? And it's so funny because I look back on it. I don't know how your parents felt about it, but my parents didn't like the music that I listened to because it swore a lot. Yeah. And now I look back on it, it's like, that was actually the least damaging aspect of what that music was. I mean, yeah, I probably shouldn't be pumping that into my brain all the time, but more about like, I would bleed and die for you and you'd still never forgive me or love me, or like, it's just like, how did I let myself listen to that crap and not think that I was going to internalize it?
Dude, it's so true. Like every band was like that in that hardcore emo phase.
Right. You think about like Taking Back Sunday's first album and just how over the top it is, or every single Saves the Day song, or all. I can't believe that I would pump that into my head.
It's true, man. It's really interesting. I haven't really thought of that. I haven't really thought about the music I listened to, how it affected me when I was younger, believe it or not. Yeah. That's really interesting, man. I'd love to do a part 2 to this. Maybe when we get more juice on some stuff. Yeah,
I'd love to. No, I think it'd be fun. This has been really fun. I think you more so than a lot of other guys. You ask questions where, and I know you picked up on this. I'm sure the audience has picked up on this. We're just thinking out loud as we go through this. And these are not the canned questions that I normally get. So I'd love to do a part 2 with you. This has been really fun.
Cool, man. No, I agree. That's been great. I would like to meet you more if I can get down to the States. Where are you at? What state?
I'm out in Salt Lake City. I'm in Utah. So I'm a little east of you.
You're a little east. Yeah. It'd be a far run, be a crazy walk. Yeah. if I get out to the States, man, I'm going to hit you up.
I'd love to connect. That'd be a blast. We can train together.
Yeah. Cool, man. Let's do that. And I'll figure out what to wear.
Yes. Yeah. Come awesome. Out to Salt Lake. We'll spend a day training, another day shopping. We'll have some fun.
That'd be awesome, man. Cool. Yeah. Thanks for doing this, man. It was great to meet you.
Thanks for having me on, man. Real fun.
Yeah. Awesome.